And we are back with part 3 of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life Version, TLV. And we are this week, Monday, February 3rd, 2020, reading chapters 11 through 23. And we are up to chapter 15. And I am hoping that part 2 gets in its entirety because I wanted to actually take that to the very end of the Melchizedek order and explain that that is a shadow of Yeshua, of Jesus. So we're going to move on to chapter 15, and that's called Cutting a Covenant. After these things, the word of Adonai came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "My Lord Adonai, what will you give me, since I am living without children, and the heir of my household is Eliezer, Eliezer of Damascus?" Then Abram said, "Look, you have given me no seed, so a house-born servant is my heir." So back in that time, if there was no heir, actually whatever a couple had would actually be the inheritance would go to actually a servant that was named to be their heir. So he's thinking that, okay, Eliezer is my servant, so is this who my inheritance is going to? Because is how this is going to come about? Because I have no children. But the Lord told him differently. So as we read on, then behold, the word of Adonai came to him, saying, "This one will not be your heir, but in fact, one who will come from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up now at the sky and count the stars. If you are able to count them," then he said to him, "so shall your seed be." So in other words, you can't count the stars. There's too many. Your seed is going to be so great, and you're going to be a great nation. Then he believed in Adonai, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Then he said to him, "I am Adonai who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to give you this land to inherit it." So he said, "My Lord Adonai, how will I know that I will inherit it?" Then he said to him, "Bring me a 3-year-old young cow, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young bird." So he brought all these to him and cut them in half and put them each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. Then the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. When the sun was about to set and a deep sleep fell on Abram, behold, terror of great darkness was falling upon him. Then he said to Abram, "Know for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years." So God gave Abram the vision of the time when Israel, the Hebrews, were enslaved to Egypt for that 400-year period. And he goes on to tell Abram, "But I am going to judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward, they will go out with many possessions, but you will come to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age." In other words, Abram's not going to see this happen, but he's actually being shown what is going to happen in the future. And then in the 4th generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun set and has become dark, behold, there was a smoking oven and a fiery torch that passed between these pieces. On that day, Adonai cut a covenant with Abram, saying, "I give this land to your seed from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." So Abram's actually getting visions from the Lord, vision and dreams. So that's a way that God does communicate with us sometimes. So in this chapter, Abraham actually saw the fire of God. And the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates." And as I said, the very land that is being contested today is the very land that God gave to Abram and God set the boundaries on it. So God cut the covenant with Abram. A covenant is a vow, a promise, and God, again, like I said, keeps his covenants and does not break them. There is a type and shadow with this, with Yeshua and the crucifixion. Yeshua had been on the cross, and prior to his death, a darkness fell for 3 hours. So when we read about the darkness that occurred in chapter 15, we can look at this as a type of shadow of Yeshua. And God accepted the sacrifice, which was Yeshua as the Lamb of God. Then Yeshua gave up the ghost. With God made a covenant with Abram first, and the darkness fell, and he consumed the sacrifice as it was acceptable to God. Then he gave the covenant to him. We later received the covenant of salvation and eternal life through Yeshua. So you can see how this was a shadow to that very thing. Chapter 16. Hagar and Ishmael. So we're going to talk about Hagar and Ishmael in this chapter. How Sarai made a mistake and really didn't listen to what God was promising them, and she went ahead of herself. Now, Sarai, and I have a hard time pronouncing that, so bear with me. Sarai, Abraham's wife, had not borne him any children, but she had an Egyptian slave girl named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "Look now, Adonai has prevented me from having children. Go please to my slave girl. Perhaps I'll get a son by her." So that's what she decided to do to make this happen. Abram listened to Sarai's voice. So Abram's wife took her slave girl Hagar, the Egyptian, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to Abram, her husband, to be his wife. Then he went to Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, in her eyes her mistress was belittled. So Sarai said to Abram, "The wrong done to me is because of you. I myself placed my slave girl in your embrace. Now that she saw that she had become pregnant, so in her eyes I am belittled. May Adonai judge between you and me." Abram said to Sarai, "Look, your slave girl is in your hand. Do to her what is good in your eyes." So Sarai afflicted her, and she fled from her presence. Then the angel of Adonai found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, next to the spring on the way to Shur, and that's Shur. He said, "Hagar, Sarai's slave girl, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai." The angel of Adonai said, "Return to your mistress and humble yourself under her hand." Then the angel of Adonai said to her, "I will bountifully multiply your seed, and they will be too many to count." Then the angel of Adonai said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and about to bear a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For Adonai has heard your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and away from all his brothers will he dwell." So she called Adonai, who was speaking to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "Would I have gone here indeed looking for him who looks after me? That is why the well is named the well of the living one who sees me. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered, Bered. Then Hagar gave birth to a son for Abram, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael for Abram. So I want to pause here for a minute. There's a few things in here. This is how we get the Muslim nation, the Islam, comes from Ishmael, and the passages where yes, their seed would the seed would multiply, and there would be many. Also, that is actually true as we look today. That is very true. But it says in this passage that he will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and away from his brothers will he dwell. Well, when we look, that is true. The hand is against everyone that is not like them, including among themselves with the Sunni and the Shia. They can't stand each other. They're always warring one with the other. So that is actually, a vision that was given to Hagar about Ishmael and his seed and how that would transpire. So when we look at it today, we definitely see that is so. And actually, this was a big mistake of Sarai, to decide that she was barren, and since she and Abram were promised a child, in order for it to happen, for there to be an heir, it would have to come from Hagar, and that wasn't true. But she took this upon herself to make this decision. It did not come from God. It did not come from Adonai. So she didn't wait on the promise of God. So when we think about waiting on the promise of God, when He's promised, He's going to come through with His promise. We just need to be patient. It's on His time, not our time when we think it should happen. So what happened is Sarai despised Hagar when she knew that she had conceived, and she realized that she had been wrong. So she was not very nice to Hagar, and Hagar fled. And so the angel of the Lord found her, told her that she needed to return to her mistress, that she was going to have a son, name him Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard her affliction, and that's what that means. But she was told that he was going to be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And Hagar was also told that Ishmael's seed would grow into a large nation, which, like we just discussed, that. So Abram in the King James Version says he was 86 years. Well, that actually means 86 years. A score is 20 years. Ishmael, of course, was not the promised son, and Hagar was not the promised mother. So this is where the Nation of Islam came out of, and this is also where the conflict originated from, because he was not the promise. Chapter 17, Covenant and Circumcision. When Abram was 99 years old, Adonai appeared to Abram, and he said to him, I am El Shaddai. Continually walk before me, and you will be blameless. And El Shaddai is God Almighty. My heart's desire is to make my covenant between me and you, and then I will multiply you exceedingly much. Abram fell on his face, and God spoke with him, saying, For my part, because my covenant is with you, you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer will your name be Abram, but your name will be Abraham, because I make you the father of a multitude of nations. Yes, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings will come forth from you. Yes, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, in order to be your God and your seed's God after you. I will give to you and to your seed after you the land where you are an outsider, the whole land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. God also said to Abraham, As for you, my covenant you must keep, you and your seed after throughout their generations. This is my covenant that you must keep between me and you and your seed after you. All your males must be circumcised. You must be circumcised in the flesh of the foreskin, and this will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Also, your 8-day-olds must be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, including a houseborn slave or a slave bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your seed. Your houseborn slave and your purchased slave must securely be circumcised. So my covenant will be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. But the uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of the foreskin, that person will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. God also said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her by that name, Sarai. Rather, Sarah is her name, and I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son from her. I will bless her, and she will give rise to nations. Kings of the people will come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to his heart, Will a son be born to 100-year-old man? Or will Sarah, who is 90 years old, give birth? So Abraham said to God, If only Ishmael might live before you. But God said, on the contrary, Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you must name him Isaac. So I will confirm my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. See, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him very much. He will father 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this set time next year. When he finished speaking with him, God went out from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all of his houseborn slaves, and all his purchased slaves, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin on this very same day, just as God had spoken with him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and his son Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. On this very same day, Abraham and Ishmael, his son, were circumcised. Also, all the men of his house, houseborn slaves and slaves purchased from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. And I will come back with part 4.